Hi everyone. How are you doing so far? Well, we are almost at the 3/4 of the whole semester. So I just wanted to check how you are doing well so far. And today we are at the lecture 11, testing and assessment. As I mentioned a little bit in the beginning of the semester, the importance of testing and assessment, because when working with the client, the building relationship with the client is one of the most important the task as a counselor. However, once building relationship, we have to assess the symptom and the level of and also seriousness of the problem. So today we will talk about more about the testing and assessment. Let's take a look at the course objective, the class objective for lecture 11. The first one is we want to compare definition of testing and assessment. We will see some different the meaning of each concept. The second one, we want to explain importance of testing and assessment in counseling, because that is usually kind of one of the core the steps and stage in whole counseling procedure. So we want to know why and how the testing and assessment are important in the counseling. The third one describes different types of assessment. There are many different testings are used in the counseling session. In particular, cognitive and affective domain, and also the counselor use some formal or informal assessment. So we want to review some different types of assessment. Next is understand how to use basic statistics in interpreting testing, assessment, and result. Well, this is more focused on some standardized testing, and because even counselor use some the testing result in order to interpret the client situation. So we want to know how to apply some basic statistics in interpreting and understanding the client situation. Finally, we want to know some basic the concept in testing. For example, validity and reliability and practicability, practicality and cultural fairness. Because when we use some testing and assessment, we have to choose what would be the best testing for a particular client in order to select the best assessment. We have to know some like the concept like this, 4 types of test worthiness. So we will review each of these for today. The first one, we want to discriminate the definition testing from assessment. Do you see some difference here? Testing and assessment. The testing is finding out the level of knowledge and skill, and sometimes it is recognized a subset of assessment techniques. So if you look at the figure here on the right side, you see the whole 4 component is explain the whole the assessment. And if you look at here is ability testing and personality testing. So sometimes testing is recognized a subset of the whole assessment technique, and also the testing yielding scores based on the data. So compared to the assessment, testing is something that we just measure and we just evaluate the score of a person. So finding out the level of knowledge and yielding score. So measurement and evaluating itself it is testing. However, assessment is more additional. It has additional meaning. If you look at here, comprising the instrument and procedure to gather data for appraisal, and also broad array of evaluated procedure. So the assessment is not only the measuring the score, but also including the whole procedure. For example, after measuring the score, we have to interpret, we have to consider some other factors. So the assessment is a more comprehensive term compared to the testing. So if you look at the figure again, the assessment procedure includes the different types of testing and also some informal assessment and even clinical interview. So assessment is more the comprehensive and broader concept compared to the testing. And also we want to know why the testing and assessment are important in counseling. If you look at the first one is understanding the client, because the reason why we want to use the assessment is to measure a certain characteristics of the client. For example, if we want to know the anxiety level of the client, if the client has some anxiety disorder, we can let client to complete a certain like anxiety related assessment or testing, and that result will show us how the clients are serious in terms of the anxiety level. So we can understand the client by using the testing and assessment. The second one is, second and then third are related with the program. Sometimes we use assessment to evaluate the effectiveness of the program, and sometimes we use that test result in order to develop and generate and create some the counseling program. For example, before the counseling, we can use something like this is a counseling session. Okay, so before the working with the client, we can measure that particular client a certain characteristic before the session. So that will be, I would say, 101. It means observation, and after working with the client, so after finishing the counseling with the client, we can observe again. So that will be observation 2. In this case, we could use some anxiety-related assessment or any questionnaire. So we can compare how a person's and the client's anxiety level has been decreased over the session. So if we know, okay, the 01 was higher than 02, it means that the client anxiety level has been decreased by the counseling. So it will show the effectiveness of the counseling. We can also apply this framework, not only the individual counseling, but also implementation of the whole counseling program. Okay? We can also use that testing result to develop the better program. Okay? For example, if the program has like 6 different sessions, so the program session number 1, and session number 2, and session number 3, like this. We can measure a certain characteristic in between, before, like each time. And we can also identify which session was more effective than other session. So we can understand, okay, this session was better than and this one, and we want to investigate which components were so effective. So we can update and enhance the program by looking at the testing result here, like this. And if you look at the left side, we can also use the testing and assessment when consulting with others. When I worked as a counselor at school, I usually meet the student in the beginning, and I have some basic testing result, and then I send that information to the other professional to work together. So sometimes testing result will be used when consulting with others. And reading professional literature, because when if you want to read some updated the knowledge, you may want to look up some scholarly journal. And usually the scholarly journal and article include lots of statistical information, and so you need to have a certain level of knowledge on testing and assessment. So these are the why we want to use some testing and assessment for counseling. So the types of assessment, I just the cut and paste here from the textbook. If you look at here, test in the cognitive domain, and also the second in the middle of the picture is it shows some affective domain, for example, personality. And the third one is shows some informal assessment procedure. So let me explain briefly these types of the assessment, and then I will show some example. Let's take a look at the first one is cognitive domain, assessment of ability. There are two types of ability here. The first one, if you look at here, this one is achievement, and this one is aptitude. It's similar. The achievement is something that the product of their learning. So achievements show how they achieved by learning something. So it could be used by survey or types of battery, and some diagnostic, or sometimes achievement testing used for readiness. For example, in Korean education system, every year, and almost all students, in the beginning of the school year, all students take a test in order to identify their readiness for their learning. Okay, sometimes it's called 진단평가, like initial testing, in order to identify their level of learning. So if we identify a certain student who show very low achievement, okay, it's called underachiever, and then we can take them out for a certain special additional tutoring or some classroom. It's called underachiever classroom, 학습 부진아, like this. So achievement testing is to identify a certain student's ability in terms of academic way. So we can use some readiness in order to identify some readiness. Sometimes you can use to diagnose a certain level of the learning disorder types of thing. However, aptitude is different. Is also one of the ability, but achievement is based on their learning and their kind of effort. But aptitude is more their intrinsic, some existing level of capability. For example, intelligence. Okay, for example, intelligence is highly correlated with the achievement, but not always. Even a student is pretty smart, so if it's very high intelligent, but that does not necessarily mean that that student showed a high achievement if that student really didn't, make effort. So some other cognitive ability and special aptitude. So these types of thing, anyway, achievement and aptitude is one of the assessment in identifying some ability. The second one is test in the affective domain. So the first one is the thinking ability. The second one is some emotion related things. In this case, it shows three types of things. The first one is objective method. So we can usually paper and pencil. So we can let the student to check and complete the survey. And projective. Projective is a way of identifying a certain characteristic more indirect way. I will show some example after this slide. So the paper pencil is more objective, and unstructured responses and projective. and interest, we can use some different types. For example, we can even use some paper and pencil to measure some interest level. The last one is informal assessment. It shows some rating scale and classification system, and we can visit the classroom to observe a student's particular behavior. And also we can simulate a certain setting to measure a student's typical reaction to a certain stimulus. So that could be some informal assessment procedure. So let me give you some example of one of the projective assessment. Projective assessment is pretty effective because it shows some, it actually decreases some resistance, okay? Because when we work together with the client, client usually shows some resistance because they feel, okay, I am like judged by the counselor. So if you look at here, this is one of the projective testing. It was completed by the 6th grade elementary school, and the counselor asked the student to express the family. Okay, can you draw your family as a fish? And the counselor only suggested only the framework of the fish bowl here, and the student complete the picture here. If you look at here, if you look at here, it shows that the dad and mommy, and also there is younger brother here. Do you see that? It's hard to see because the younger brother is hidden by some of the weeds here, and this is the person, the client, and also it is a pet. So the student identified, I have 5 members, mommy and daddy and younger brother and me and pet. So it's pretty normal picture. But one thing that was interesting to me was, how about this younger brother? Why this younger brother is hidden and he is hiding behind the weed? And the client said, I don't like him. I don't like him. That's why the client drew the younger brother in this way. So this is more indirect way to identify the client relationship with the family member. There are many different ways to identify the relationship with the client's family member, relationship with the member. But this is projective because the client project a person, that client's the experience in indirect way to this picture. How about this? Let's take a look. Okay, so that is here. This shows some kind of hierarchy. So usually, if a fish is located in the higher the water level here, and then that means that fish has more power than the lower. So in this case, we could assume that we cannot guarantee, but we could assume that the daddy has more power than a woman, the mommy. But it could be reversible, because we also experience many family like this. How about this? Mommy is facing this way and daddy is facing the other way. And it also shows some not really the warm and good climate in the family, because it is also some projection of the client. The client may recognize the relationship between parents are not really good, and the client project that recognition into like this type of the picture. So these are the example of the projective test. How about this, the other picture that the other client drew? It's very different picture. You see some interesting part. And here is very, like here is very, the belly is very oval here. And the client said, my brother is so fat. And one thing that was interesting to me was all other fish, including clients, are the same fish. However, the daddy is totally different fish. It's a shark, and also very sharp teeth here. And I asked the client, what does it mean, very sharp like a teeth? And the client said, my dad is, he swears a lot. He speaks so many bad words. So that is another way for us to identify the client's subjective recognition of the family by using this type of projective testing. This slide shows the basic statistics in counseling. The first one is central tendency. The central tendency shows how the participant did well in general in terms of some average. But there are three different ways. Is a mean. Mean is a kind of just average. So the add up the whole score divided by the number of the participant. And median is the another way to identify the central tendency. Median is different because median is exactly the middle of the participant when we make the whole participant in a line. So what would be exactly the middle point of the whole score or participant? And also mode is which score is the most frequent score. But that's another way to identify the tendency in general. So I will show some example by showing the next slide. So there are three different ways. Variability, the one is the range. Range is the distance between the highest point and the lowest point. It shows how the scores are spread out. The standard deviation is another statistical way to show some the variability. I think I'm pretty sure you know how to calculate. You learn in the high school in the mathematics class. Normal distribution. If we have large number of the participants, and usually the score spread out in a normal distribution. Okay, it's like a bear-shaped curve. I will show that in the example too. And derived score, sometimes we want to compare a certain score in two different tests. So we want sometimes use some standardized score. For example, T-score and some other score like SAT and GRE is more standardized and derived score. So actually, the original score is transformed by considering the mean and the standard deviation. So we can compare that score. The correlation shows some relationship between two set of score. It range from -1 to +1. -1 is negative relationship. If one score is going up and the other variable is going down, and -1 is a perfect negative score, and +1 is a perfect positive relationship. Let's take a look at this example here. And this is the actual data that I have from the course that I taught in the graduate level. The course name was the Counseling and Guidance. It was open to any not any undergraduate. It's open to the undergraduate student who register in the College of Education. So you look at here. Do you see some shape here? It's not the perfect normal distribution. It's a little bit skewed. You can hear. Normal distribution, here, but actually this the actual score is a little bit skewed. For example, like this. Do you see that? Okay, which means we have more students in higher level of score. So more students did good job in the testing in the midterm exam, but small number of students did poor job in the left side. So this is more the skewed distribution. I think this is the typical pattern in Ewha Women's University. Lots of students, they prepare a lot for the testing, so they really did a good job in this type of shape. And the range, that is one of, we talked about some, the definition of range is the kind of distance between the highest point is 59 and lowest point in 21. So that is the, if we calculate the score, that is the range. So that is one of the variability. And mean in this case, when I calculate by statistical program or even like a regular program, like an Excel program, it also showed mean was 50.17. So actually mean was here, around here. Okay, mean was here. And standard deviation was the 7.83, close to around 8. It's pretty, the big standard deviation. Do you see that? The highest score was 59, that's about 60, and the lowest is a 21. So we see about the range is about 40 score difference. So the variable scores, that's why the standard deviation is pretty high. Usually in the midterm, it was interesting. Usually in the midterm, the standard deviation is much higher than the final. Do you have any guess? Because this group of students, they make more effort for the final. So actually, these group will go this way, but the student with higher score still remain. So actually, the final exam usually show the pattern like this. It's much shorter and still like this. So we see the lower standard deviation. How about the relationship? So these are the testing score in midterm. It also includes the freshman through the senior. It shows that another scatter plot of the score. This means, in this case, this is a freshman, and this is a second. This is the midterm score, and this is the level, and junior and senior. So we have more sophomore student here, and 3 senior and some other freshmen. And these small circles show each person. Do you see a kind of pattern? Okay, the senior student shows some higher score here, and this type. Still, that's why it's a positive. But the strength of the correlation is not really high. It's only 0.36, but it still shows some positive correlation. So we can say the higher the grade in the student, the higher score in general, but the strength is it's not really high. But the negative relationship would be, if we have some negative correlation, it will show like this pattern. Okay? And if the negative relationship is very strong, and it will show very thin, like this. And one line is a perfect relationship. So next slide shows some exercise to identify your understanding. If you look at the question here, you administer the SAT test to about 500 students, and Mike scored 400 on the test. And it's really hard to tell if the mic did well or not in the testing. So we want to know how Mike did well in the testing. So the Mike scored anyway 400 on the test, and the College Board reported the mean score of 480, and with a standard deviation of 80. So this is the information about the whole population who took this test, SAT, and interpret Mike's score considering the normal curve distribution. Usually, as I said, if we have a large population to took the test, it usually shows some normal distribution like here. And it shows some basic information of the bell curve shape. So it shows, the bell-shaped curve here. In the middle, it is the mean. And also, the first standard deviation from the mean, the composition is about 34 points, and the two standard deviation from the mean is additional about the 14%. And the three standard deviation is about the 2%. So usually 34 and 14 and 2 is easy if you memorize that number to calculate like this type of question. And also this the figure looks a little bit complicated because it also shows other derived score like standard score. For example, here percentile here, so and also G-score is here. G-score usually the mean is 0 and one standard deviation is 1, and T-score here, T-score has the 0, 50 as a mean, and also 10 as a standard deviation. So let's take a look at again here. So in this case, Mike scored 400, and the mean score was the 450. Okay, so this is the mean. So this is 450. This point. And standard deviation was 80, and we see some 8 here. So here is the 400, and this one is 560. Okay, and actually this is the point that Mike score. So Mike score is right here. Okay. So we can interpret based on this information. So the whole population here, this is exactly the half of the shape. So this is 50%, and this is about Mike ranked here, and this is another 34. So if we put together, that is about 84%. Okay, so if we have about 100 students, so Mike has 84 students who did better than Mike. So actually, Mike didn't really good job. He did poor job because out of 100, he ranked about 84. So he didn't really good job in this case. So do you understand? So if you are not clear, please read again the textbook and then practice with this exercise again. Okay. The last one is test worthiness. When we use some testing and assessment, we want to select the best and good and appropriate testing, and these 4 different the concept will give us some guideline when choosing the good testing. The first, the validity, is showing that a test is measuring what it is supposed to measure. For example, if we want to measure a student's intelligence, and then that particular testing has to be designed to measure students' intelligence, not confidence or anxiety, right? So validity shows that it is measuring what it's supposed to measure. So it is about the accuracy of the measurement, okay? However, reliability, that's another important concept in testing. It's the showing degree to which an instrument measures the same way each time it is used. In other words, so if we have an intelligence testing, and if we know that testing has very high validity, which means it measures students' intelligence, not other psychological characteristics. So if we, let the student to complete that testing, and then let's assume that the student showed intelligence like a 110. And if we let the student take the test again, and then it should show pretty similar score, like around 110, like a 115 or 113. However, if we have very different test score from the second testing, it shows the reliability is very low. So the reliability is about consistency. If a testing is really good, it has to show some consistent score by repetition of testing. Let's take a look at this picture here. The first picture here, and second and third. Let's take a look at from the third. Okay, so the center of the target, that is the point that we want to measure. In this case, the dart targeted exactly the point it is supposed to target, so it shows high validity. And also, all the other dot around here is in about the same spot, so very consistent. So this picture shows very high validity and high reliability. However, here, it didn't really target that it's supposed to be targeted, but it is pretty consistent. Okay, they are pretty, on the same the spot here. So this picture shows the validity is not high, but reliability is pretty high because it is focusing a certain, and it shows consistency. But the first one here, it doesn't really target in the center, and also it doesn't show consistency. So this is low validity and low reliability. So sometimes these pictures are used to illustrate the concept of the validity and reliability. And practicality, if we want to use some testing, and sometimes we have to buy. And so it costs money. So we have to figure out, how much we have to use for the particular testing. We can also think about, for example, intelligence test. The Wechsler intelligence is pretty good, the validity and reliability, but it is individual testing. So we cannot use that testing for my whole classroom. So we have to think about some practicality, like examining if the test is realistic. How about the cultural fairness, identifying if the test is cross-culturally fair? It happens a lot in the United States, in particular for the student who cultural minority. For example, like an intelligence test. One of the questions in intelligence test asking the basic knowledge about the history. But the student from other country, they don't know about the American history. So even though they know their own history, but the testing only measure the U.S. history. So actually in this testing, the student from the different country would show low intelligence because that testing is not sensitive to cultural diversity. So we also want to consider some cultural fairness as well. So today, we talked about some testing and assessment. We try to compare the definition and difference, testing and assessment. We also explain how the testing and assessment are important in counseling. And also we reviewed many different types of testing, and I showed some example. And also by the showing some exercise, we reviewed how to apply the basic statistics in interpreting and understanding a student's a certain characteristic. And finally, we reviewed the test worthiness, which are very useful when we choose some the better and appropriate testing. And next week, next lecture, we will talk about one particular assessment to kind of experience, okay, oh, these types of assessment really, they help me to understand my personality. So we will talk about that in next lecture. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and see you in next time.